I have been informed by our council that we do need to report, or that I need to report out our closed session, that the board has authorized the chair and the staff to begin the process of hiring a search consultant. So, Steve, have I fulfilled my duties? Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to item number 6.1, our update on the implementation of our Senate Bill 1440. Michelle, I assume, is that you? And Vice Chancellor Skinner?
Good morning, Mr. President, Chancellor, members of the board. This item is an informational item. It's an update on implementation of Senate Bill 1440, Senator Padilla's bill that established a transfer guarantee between the community colleges and the CSU. And I'm co-presenting with Michelle Pilati, President of the Academic Senate, and this implementation of this transfer guarantee has really been a partnership from the start. Not only a partnership between the California community colleges and the CSU, but also between our office and the Academic Senate. The Academic Senate has provided tremendous leadership, and I can honestly say that the implementation would not be nearly as far along as it is if it wasn't for their partnership in this. And with that, I want to turn it over to Michelle, and we're essentially this is a standing item that will be before you at every board meeting. It's an update on implementation of SB 1440, and really the purpose of it is is to allow you to monitor the progress of this important reform, to provide you with greater knowledge so that you can help to promote the benefits of this transfer guarantee, and lastly, that you can hold our districts accountable for implementation and hold the Chancellor's Office accountable for implementation. So that's the purpose. So get used to it. You're going to have an update at every board meeting, and with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Good morning. As you have heard previously, instead of having 112 colleges go off and create a whole wide array of different degrees, we realized that it made sense to take this opportunity to try to establish some sort of common preparation for popular majors so that a student could do one degree and be ready for all the CSUs as opposed to having to come up with a different plan, which led to the idea of the transfer model curriculum that provides a structure to the community college degree and is developed jointly between community college and CSU faculty members. We already were bringing the faculty in different disciplines together to talk about course descriptors as part of the course identification numbering system, and we were able to sort of piggyback the 1440 work on top of that and began the process of developing TMCs focusing on the most popular majors, the majors that more students transfer to into the CSU, using data from the CSU to identify which majors it made sense to work on. To date, we now have 18 finalized TMCs that community colleges can look at and say, does that work as a degree for us, and develop degrees consistent with the TMCs. The process of our interaction with the CSU involves the CSU looking at the TMCs and making a determination if a student came in with a degree based on this, can we get them out in 60 units? And that's where we've heard about this determination of similar. So we have 18 TMCs so far. We're hoping to have 25 done by the end of this academic year. We currently have several that just closed the vetting process. This includes computer science, biology, geography, and journalism. We also have been doing some work with both nursing and engineering. Now, nursing and engineering do not fit into the 1440 60 plus 60 structure, but we're looking to see if there's a way to establish criteria for disciplines that don't fit into that structure, where we could have something like a TMC that exists for them, a common preparation for students, and then work with the CSU to provide the same guarantees and benefits of the TMC process for those disciplines. So the 1440 guarantees, even though it doesn't fit into that structure. As you've heard before, there's sort of two bodies working on this, the intersegmental curriculum work group doing the curricular side of things, and the intersegmental oversight committee sort of looking it all over. And the intersegmental curriculum work group is working on that criteria for nursing and engineering and possibly other disciplines that don't fit into it. And also looking at what point do we start looking at degrees that are not aligned with the TMC? What disciplines, where does it make sense to not have a TMC at all and to have a more local degree that serves that same 1440 purpose? So that's sort of where we're at on the TMC faculty curriculum side of things, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about that.
Member Baum.
When will we start seeing the first graduates of these programs?
They're actually coming through the pipeline for spring. At the last oversight committee, we actually had 3 articulation officers in the audience, and one shared that they had, I think, 26 students that were graduating specifically with a psychology degree that was based on the TMC. And so the process of the CSU looking at those students and figuring out what they're doing with them has begun, and that was actually a really interesting question. A question that some people had was, when you apply to the CSU, you don't apply to the system, you apply to individual CSUs. And the question came up, what if a student applied to 3 CSUs with one of these degrees that guarantees them a place in the system, but then was not accepted by any of those three CSUs? And the CSUs shared that they then get pushed out to other colleges. And in the instance that they were aware of where this happened, the student was then offered a choice of 3 different CSUs which they could go to. So that sort of, are you guaranteed to get in somewhere? Is the CSU going to find you a place outside of your choices? The answer is yes. And there was a lot of concern from our people in the field about what would happen to such students.
Well, and I'm glad, because I'm looking forward to maybe a year from now seeing this all covered in blue, right? And that we will have done that. And then I want to hear back, are the students finding the places and getting through the CSUs in a smooth transition as well?
Right. And if just to clarify, the transfer model curricula, it's simply that, it's a model. It's saying that as a statewide pathway, these are some selections of courses that CSU and community college faculty have agreed create a strong linkage, and so that should be honored as a transfer degree, as a transfer pathway. The second piece, though, is that then our colleges need to take that TMC and actually build the degree and offer it locally. And so in order to populate that matrix, and that's what I'll present about in a little bit, it's a matter of taking that model and implementing it at the local level. And it's not until those degrees are in place that students can actually start following that pathway, that the degree is essential.
Vice President Perez.
I'm looking at some of the areas where there's commonness across the different college campuses, and I'm just a bit surprised that there's not more like business administration. So what is it that makes one area more an area focused, where more colleges are partnering in that particular area over others?
So there's a timeline difference. So if someone had actually sat down and figured this out, if you look at how many community colleges have done a degree or said they're doing a degree, there's a relationship between how long the TMC has been out there for them to consider it, and how many people are actually doing it. So the first 3 TMCs that we developed were psychology, sociology, and comm studies, and you see we have a lot more happening there. The other piece of that is the determination of similar by the CSU. So we have all these different things that have to happen. The TMCs develop, the community colleges look at it and say, does that make sense for us? Do we like that? Do we want to do that? And then the CSUs have to say, is it similar? And so we have the information on similar still coming out, some of the TMCs that were developed later. So there's some timeline things that drive a lot of this data.
And just for a point of clarification, once a TMC is accepted by both parties, then is it consistent through any community college campus and how they accept it, or does each campus determine whether or not they want to accept that criteria?
Excellent question. So the TMCs most of them have some variability in them. For the most part, they begin with 2 or 3 sort of core courses, the courses that you have to have, and then after that, there's variability, so that not all the degrees look exactly the same, because most of us, our curriculum has been designed around the CSUs that we feed to, so there may be different choices that we make, and the TMCs were really built with that in mind, to recognize if you're feeding to these 3 CSUs, you're probably going to want to put these 2 courses in here. And if you're in another part of the state, you're going to probably put these courses in there.
And Mr. President, there is a second piece of the presentation that deals with the degrees, if you want me to transition to that. And
I think somebody else had a question.
Anybody, were there another question?
No, that's fine.
Member McDougal?
Yeah. Michelle, I'd like to get your assessment of whether this, from your perspective, this program has fulfilled, I think, the substantial potential everyone felt when 1440 passed. That, there was a feeling, all this confusion about transferring, all the duplication of course taking. If a student has an associate degree from a community college, that student's going to be able to go in junior standing, be able to graduate by taking approximately 60 more units, but not be bogged down, not be confused, and everything else. And in terms of that promise, which I think was substantial, do you feel, from your working so closely with it, that the efforts of reaching the potential that even you had envisioned for them, or and if so, that's great. If not, why not? And what, if anything, can this board do to support you and support the achievement of that objective?
I think the answer to that will come when we see what happens to these students when they go through the CSU. I think the answer to that will come when we see what happens to students after they transfer to the CSU. The way it's supposed to work, and the way it's been envisioned, and the way we're being told it's going to work, and what's going to happen with our students, if all of that happens, absolutely. And in fact, I think I've seen.
Is there doubt in your mind about whether that will happen, where these things have been worked through? I mean, is that doubtful, or?
We hear different things, and we hear people from the field hearing that, a faculty at such and such CSU told them this or that that's inconsistent with the broader message that's out there. So that would be, there's just those uncertainties, and there's always rumors about how things are going to work and what's going to happen, and so there's some of that out there, but what's been established and the way things are supposed to work, I think, does achieve the promise that was envisioned.
Yeah, and on that point, I think, while it's still a work in progress in terms of the similar issue that Michelle was talking about, I have a high degree of confidence we'll get there, and I base that off a couple things. One is the interactions between Chancellor Scott and Chancellor Reed on this have been substantial. There's been a high degree of engagement over the last year on this, and I think they've laid the foundation in the senior leadership in both systems to make clear where we're headed with this reform, and the Chancellor's office and the CSU Chancellor's office is playing a very active and aggressive role in terms of ensuring that each of their campuses honors the full measure of this promise, that they honor these degrees in the TMCs. And so the CSU Chancellor's Office is holding the campuses accountable, and they're also mindful of the fact that the legislature is also waiting in the wings. If CSU doesn't honor the promise of these degrees, the legislature, I believe, will come in and hold CSU accountable as well. LAO has been at all our meetings. I would say we have our monthly implementation oversight committee meeting, where we've got the high-level leadership from both systems and from the academic senates around the table, and there's a spotlight that's on implementation on this issue, and it's going to ensure that there's ample pressure to move forward. So I think we'll get there.
Chancellor Scott would like to say something.
Okay, and just so it's clear about the presentation, there's a second piece to this that's on the degrees.
Very good.
And I think when we step through that, it'll make it much clearer in terms of where we stand in terms of implementation.
Okay.
I guess I have to say that at the chancellor's office, there is a degree of impatience because this is law. We're not talking about something that's optional. And when Vice Chancellor Skinner mentions the legislature, I can guarantee you that Senator Padilla, when he authored this bill, intended to see this happen. So we will, I'm a little bothered when I look here to see that there's 3 or 4 colleges that haven't gotten around to even getting 2 up. And that's not a very good sign. And I'll tell you why I'm impatient. Because of the students. I'm not impatient on the basis of me. I just think students deserve this. This was passed. It was intended to be implemented. And whether it's any failure on the part of community college or the failure on the part of CSU, we want to see some action here. Now, I believe there's a statement that this is supposed to be, by the end of next year, 80% of the degrees are supposed to be finished. And I just think we've got to recognize that we can't just always wait, not because, as I said, because of the chancellors, but because of the students. That's that. They want this, and they deserve it, and it will save them time and money and the state a great deal of money.
Member Yang.
I guess just follow up to that comment. What has the Chancellor's Office or the Academic Senate do to for those schools who haven't had any like transfer degrees? What are the steps? I guess.
Yeah, but the legislation. Let's start with the legal authority, and again, some of this I think we're a little out of order in the questions because we haven't laid the full foundation of the issue yet, and we'll step through this whenever you want us to. But there are 5 districts that have not achieved what we've defined as the minimum threshold for compliance with the degree, and those 5 colleges are College of Alameda, Hartnell, Laney College, Merritt, and Victor Valley College. So those 5 have not complied.
Entire district.
Yes. And so what we have gone through is we've administratively, Vice Chancellor Russell has been hounding those districts and pressing them to step through their process in terms of the local degree approval. And I've seen the emails. I've been in the room on the calls, and he's applied significant pressure. Honestly, the next step in terms of ramping this up is really this standing item before the board. It's part of our strategy by spotlighting these districts, these colleges rather, that have not complied, to apply greater public pressure on those districts. There's not a clear hammer in the legislation that allows us to take their money away, that allows us to penalize them in some other way. But you know, and I'm hoping to get to the chance also talking about some of our high-performing districts that have really gone above and beyond and have.
We'll do that, but for instance, Eric, could the Board of Governors, and would it be appropriate, Michelle, that the Board of Governors ask those districts to come here and explain why they haven't?
I think that would be an appropriate step, and that's consistent with how CSU has handled their parallel issue, which is to get each of their campuses to honor these TMCs as similar. They also have a standing item at their trustees meetings. Yeah. And at those meetings, they will have representatives from the campuses come up and explain what the challenges are and what the plan is for moving forward.
So, Chancellor, do you think that would be an appropriate step? Could we do that?
I think that's an appropriate step, and I will say that if things don't move along, I would think that Senator Padilla would be glad to carry a bill that would have some financial penalties involved in this.
Actually, it would have been good to see this before we did the 50% waiver yesterday.
I was going to say the same thing. And, you know, and I hate to be heavy-handed, but, you know, we have multiple contracts and grants that we've been approving.
That's right.
That I would have looked at a different way if I had this information yesterday.
So do I have a general sense from the board that maybe at our May meeting, we would like these colleges to peer and talk about their progress toward implementation. So Chancellor and/or Erica, can we
Sounds
see that
good to me.
that's done, and you can say that's a direct invitation from the chair of the board?
I
Absolutely.
would call
Okay.
that progressive discipline.
All right, well, I think that's a great advancement. Yeah.
Member Malumet.
I have a question for Michelle. In your answer previously, you said that not all of them are the same because you feed into different CSUs and there's some special things. But if a student is not getting into the CSUs of that neighborhood and they're getting into a CSU in another part of the state, that doesn't really apply.
So, yeah, well, and that's the whole idea around the TMC. Basically, the idea of creating these degrees with this common structure and then having the CSU say, yes, that's similar, no, that's not similar. They're basically saying that if a student comes in and doesn't necessarily have the exact courses that CSU wants, they're still going to get them out in 60 units. They're going to make the courses that the student came in with work.
So my question is, what's the big deal? Why don't they just kind of come up with that general one?
They tried to do that.
Yeah.
They tried to do that. The chancellor wrote legislation back when he was a
Yeah.
legislator that asked them to do that, and it didn't work. What's different here is it's the community colleges working with the CSUs together to do it, and then also having the legislative pressure that just the pressure from and the pressure from their chancellor to make it work, because they're being asked to do things a little differently, and that gets pushback sometimes. So.
Okay, thank you.
Member Belinsky, followed by Member McDonald.
McDougal.
I was just going to add to the discussion because of being an articulation officer and involved with the degrees locally at a college. One of the things I would note is the fact that it wasn't until the fall of 2011, if I'm correct, that you even had to have the two. So even in marketing to the students, there hasn't been a lot of time to market them. And technically, you're not supposed to put into your catalogs or into catalog supplements degrees that are pending. You're only really supposed to put in degrees that have been finalized, so I'll say that as one comment. The other comment I would make, and I hadn't thought of this until it was brought to our attention at a regional meeting last Friday, when San Francisco State and San Jose State were in the room, and about the business administration. And one of the responses to the business of administration is it hasn't been finalized all that long. It's just been a few months or a few weeks that it's even been finalized. So, I mean, you can't even go after it until it's finalized. But San Jose State made the comment that it's going to have to develop a degree because they don't have a general business administration degree. They have very specialized business degrees. So even to accept students to San Jose State in business and to deal with the TMC, they're going to have to themselves create, whereas San Francisco State, as an example, already had that degree in place as a general business. So, I mean, there's things that have to be worked out, but I mean, San Jose State did step up and say, we will be developing that degree. But again, as in anything, it takes a little bit of time. So a student applying to San Jose State with that TMC right now, they're going to have to say, we're going to have to encourage you to go to San Francisco State.
Member McDougal.
Yes, Michelle, I'd like to follow through again with you. I'd like to, you're the closest to this operationally, perhaps anyone is. And what could make it work more effectively? Or do you think it's working as effectively as it can? But what could move this along more? I mean, the improvement is so concrete. From your perspective, what does it take?
I think it's working just about as effectively as it can, given the timeline. The only reason we're as far along as we are with any of it is because the faculty got together and started working on it before the bill was even signed. I mean, we were aggressive. We saw the bill was coming. We wanted to make sure that we were moving forward with a statewide response that we thought was better for students. And so where we're at is I think we're really about as good as it can be. I think at the last IOC meeting, which was just a week or two ago, the the CSU, their part of things, seems to keep getting better as far as the determinations of similar, and that's really, really critical to the whole process. So I would argue that we're in a pretty good place, and there's so much complexity to it. Yeah, as Joseph was pointing out, there's so many different layers and different pieces, and like those colleges that don't have anything yet, the number of different reasons that could be behind that is huge. And I don't think we've gotten to the point of looking at the qualitative reasons for why they're not there, because there's, you've been at a campus, there's levels to curriculum approval, and something could happen at any one level that could slow it down. And so I think we're in a good place given everything.
Do you see a fairly rapid acceleration, for example, next year, given the time it takes to establish the groundwork and the processes?
When we start seeing that this does work for students, and the concerns that people have about how it's going to work and what's going to happen to students, the fact that we had the CSU say we had a student already who didn't get into any of the CSUs they indicated, and that the answer was they got that student into a CSU, that was a big concern from the field. We have all sorts of concerns about the impact at the student level that we don't really know how it's all going to work until it's completely rolled out. And once we see it working well, I think you will see a lot more movement, absolutely.
Right. But in terms of implementation, I'd add, I think that we can't wait to see how it plays out for, say, in these degrees that are in place. We need to move forward with opening up the pathways across the disciplines. And that's really the next phase of implementation, and that's what really this matrix speaks to. And Member Baum, your point about wanting to see this whole thing covered with blue ink, that's the goal. That's where we're headed. And so if I could quickly step through this, and you've asked the good questions, and I think we've laid the foundation on it, so there's not, I just would like to punctuate it with some additional data points in terms of implementation. Yes.
Eric, Member Bach, I had a question
I'll let
first.
it go until after.
You want to?
Actually, I think it will lay the foundation and perhaps clarify some of the points. Sure. So if you look at the chart, you saw this at the last meeting. At that point, there were approximately 250 degrees that had been approved. So again, this is the next phase. The academic senates are crafting the model, and then the next step is for the colleges to actually go through the local degree approval process. And only once that occurs is the option available to a student at the local level. So if you look at the bottom of the matrix on the last page, you'll see there's a number 310 degrees. That's the number of degrees that are currently approved. So that's up from about 250 at your last meeting. So that we're seeing some progress there. The in terms of some highlights from the sheet, that we do have 8 colleges that have approved more than 5 degrees. And so I think it's noteworthy to give them kudos in the same way that you kind of use this meeting for some accountability to apply some pressure. We also want to give some reward here. And so American River College, Kenyatta, Consumnes River College, Golden West, Long Beach City College, Pasadena City College, Santiago Canyon, and College of the Siskiyous have all really shown some exemplary attention to this issue and are currently in place. They have more than 5 degrees, and it's noteworthy there that you've got in College of the Siskiyous, one of the smallest colleges in the state, if not the smallest, and you've got with Los Rios, one of the largest, second largest in the state. So you've got a real spectrum of colleges and districts that are participating. It shows it can be done. And as came up before, there are actually a number of graduates that have already received these 1440 degrees. It's just the earliest trickles coming out of here, but San Francisco City College did have 26 degrees awarded, 25 in sociology, 25 in psychology, 1 in sociology. And so again, kudos to San Francisco on that. Citrus College also had some strong early numbers. So it's moving forward, and I think that's noteworthy. Again, the next step in this is to up the ante and to get this sheet covered with blue. And the way we're proceeding with that is to establish some goals. And so these were discussed at the last Implementation and Oversight Committee. And the goals are really twofold. One is on the TMCs, Michelle talked about building out those models across the 25 disciplines. So that lays the framework. Then what we have to do is get our colleges to come in behind that and build out the degrees. And the goal that we've laid on the table is a clear goal of 80% of these pathways being covered by 1440 degrees by fall of 2013. So that means that this next cycle of degree approval, which is heavily a fall process, that's when the heavy lifting is going to happen again, for colleges and to build out the degrees in each of these areas. And then with the remaining 20% covered by fall of 2014. And so the heavy lifting right now is at the district level, at the college level, in terms of building these degrees out. And again, so a good way to put it is thinking of getting this matrix covered with blue ink. At that point, the promise of 1440 will have been delivered in the students at their local level, regardless of which discipline they're picking, will have a viable pathway towards that statewide transfer.
Overall, it seems like outstanding work, quite frankly. Member Baca, did you have anything, or?
Yeah, I have a question, but I wanted to first say that I did attend a couple of workshops that the Academic Senate held and saw the level of enthusiasm, which was great, to getting this done. So there's a lot of enthusiasm around the state to actually move with this, and I want to be very interested in listening to the folks once they come out here as to why they haven't been able to do it. And I suspect that it'll vary, as Michelle was suggesting. But my question has to do with, again, the access issue into the CSU. And I don't know if off the top of your head, you know which areas are impacted and where it is that our students may be being sent to. I know my alma mater, Cal State Fulton, heavily impacted. I don't know, it's become increasingly difficult to get in there. But are there some areas of the state that are more accessible than others?
And so your question is the broader one of impaction at the CSU campuses. And I don't have that data here. I would say that regardless of which impacted campus, having a 1440 degree, that's one of the advantages. While the 1440 degree does not guarantee admission to a particular CSU campus, it's a guarantee to the system. The CSU is extending priority by giving a GPA bump to students that transfer with a 1440 degree. They inflate their GPA by 0.2. Is that right? It's a 0.2 bump on there for most students, and there are always nuances to this, but that's a meaningful distinction. So that's a step ahead for these students in that impacted environment. But if you want data on which of the CSU campuses are impacted, we can definitely provide that to the board.
Okay. Member McDougall, last comment.
Chairman Himmelstein, I would like to request that we bring this back in September, an understanding of what degrees are approved. That will be very helpful in understanding what the students will be confronted as they enroll next year. I would also ask that if the narrative could be a little more explanatory, both in terms of progress to this point, the sense of why the progress is where it is, what is anticipated to be achieved, let's say at the end of 2012-13, and what else we might be able to expect, so that there's a bit of a sense of here's where we are, here's where we're going, here's where we expect to be. So I would make that request.
So I
Okay.
thought this was on the agenda every.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is agendized for all of our meetings.
of our
But
meetings?
yes, so we get a regular update, but I think your point is well taken, that possibly in September we could have a bit more of a map. Okay, with that, we're going to take a 10-minute break.